Chapter 22. New Year's Day 1944. That evening, the house was silent. The news from the wireless which had filled the airwaves shortly after midnight was now a crackling of silence. Germany had called, and Josephine, awakened by a consistent, loud jeering, had wrapped her blanket around herself and brought herself down to the drawing room. "You heard," Henry said, for it was a given. No one could have slept through their cacophony and howls of derision. But it wasn't only that which had brought Josephine to consciousness. A cramp, a dull, pulsing ache had begun in her lower stomach, and she took his hand as she lowered herself into a chair near the remains of the U-log. Bill Sterling entered, his face etched with the stress of the impending big one and the weight of Dudley Clark's elaborate deceptions. He looked at the maps, then at Josephine. "Oh, good," he declared to one of the only people in the drawing room who was not in an alcohol-induced sleep. "Dudley says the Ghost Army is ready," he continued, quietly. "The Germans are biting. They think the blow is coming to the Pas-de-Calais. It gives us the window we need for Colditz." He paused, looking at his brother's fiercest ally. "But you look like a woman who has seen the end of her tether, Josephine. If you can't make the jump in January, tell me now." Josephine looked into the flames, seeing the reflection of the Saxon fortress in the embers. She felt the cramp again and waited for it to subside before she spoke. Before she could speak, Paddy's words made him think. She observed, then quickly added, "I'll make the jump." "Bill," she said, her voice regaining its steel, "the ice on the Mulder won't wait for me to feel better. And neither will David." Behind her, in the shadows, Yuri Galitzin caught her eye. His secret mission to the Vosges was still a shadow on the map, a silent vow to the missing 31. The stage was set, a phantom army in Kent, a rescue in Saxony, and a desperate search in the night and fog. 88,888,888. The Highland night was a vacuum of sound, save for the rhythmic, mournful howling of the wind through the eaves of Ear House. Inside, the darkness of the corridor was absolute, until a sliver of light spilled from Josephine's door. She had gone up shortly after speaking to Bill. Henry had not known what had kept him himself from sleep, but he had got back up from the restlessness and was pacing down the first-floor bedrooms when he saw it. Then, he heard the sound. It wasn't a cry, it was a low, guttural gasp of a creature caught in a snare. He pushed the door open to find Josephine slumped against the washstand, her face the color of bleached bone, a dark, terrifying redness spreading across the white cotton of her nightgown. "Joe," he breathed, catching her before she hit the floor. The heat of the blood was a visceral shock against his cold hands. "The ice," she whispered, her eyes unfocused, her fingers clutching his tunic with a strength born of pure agony. "I am a broken bar, so cold a broken bar." He didn't waste time with questions. He bundled her into the sheet, his own breath hitching at the sheer volume of the hemorrhage. He ran for the one man who could move mountains in the dark. Paddy Mayne was awake before Henry even hit the door. He sat up, a shadow of violence in the dim room, eyes narrowing as Druce stumbled in, his hands stained a visceral, wet crimson. "She's dying, Paddy," Henry gasped, his voice cracking. "The blood. I can't stop the blood." Paddy was out of bed in a blurred movement, then they were beside Josephine's room, his massive hand catching Henry by the throat, pinning him against the stone wall. The Irishman's face was a mask of primal fury. "You, on my life, Druce, if you've laid a hand on my sister in that way, I'll take your head off where you stand." "On my soul," Henry choked out, his eyes pleading. "I have never touched her like that. Not once. Not ever." "Paddy, let me go. She's dying, I tell you." Paddy stared at him, the madness in his eyes flickering. Slowly, like a dying fire, the rage shifted. A memory surged through the cracks of his mind. A memory, a broken bar of David Sterling, a broken bar arrogant and bruised in the cell at Colditz. His voice dripping with the casual cruelty of the upper class. "A broken bar. She's been trying to sell me that sister rot for months. Paddy, a broken bar. To give her credit, she even tries to fight like an Irishman. A broken bar. But I've spent the last few hours teaching her exactly how a British officer takes what he wants. twice. I've been inside her long enough to know there isn't a drop of main blood in that treacherous body. A broken bar. The curl of that leap, a broken bar, the snare, a broken bar. The realization hit Paddy like a physical blow. It wasn't Druce. It was the man they were preparing to rescue. The man who had treated his sister like a common spoil of war. Paddy let go of Henry. He didn't go to the bed. Not yet. He turned to the heavy oak wardrobe in the corner and struck it. The wood splintered with a sound like a rifle shot. Then came the chairs. He caught a heavy Jacobean seat and shattered it against the stone hearth. He was a whirlwind of grief and incoherent betrayal, smashing the finery of Gear House as if he could break the very history that had led them here. The sound of rending wood and shattering glass echoed through the hollow halls. A violent requiem for the child that would never see the light of a Scottish morning. Henry, who had gone to sit beside his partner, turned to watch the maybe fury. A door threw open at the end of the hall. Bill Sterling stood there in his dressing gown, his face etched with sudden alarm. "Paddy? What in God's name?" "A broken bar." He stopped dead at the threshold of Josephine's room. He saw the wreckage of the furniture, then his eyes traveled to the bed, where Henry Druce was kneeling, holding Josephine's limp, blood-stained hand. The sheets were a map of catastrophe. Bill's military composure didn't break, but his voice went dangerously quiet. "Get out, Paddy. Go outside and find your senses." Paddy stood amidst the splinters of a mahogany table, his knuckles bleeding, his chest heaving. He looked at Bill, then at the pale ghost of the woman on the bed, of the woman David had used and then left behind in a German cage. "Put her to bed properly," Bill commanded, stepping into the room and placing a firm hand on Henry's shoulder. "I'll call Clarkson from the village." "Henry, get more blankets." "She's in shock." The silence in Josephine's room was shattered by the sound of her body hitting the floorboards, a dull, heavy thud that brought Henry Druce to his feet in an instant. She was a ghost, her skin the color of the Scottish mist, and as he lifted her, the front of her nightgown bloomed with a sudden, terrifying dark warmth. "Bill." "Paddy." Henry's roar echoed through the stone corridors of Gear House. Bill Sterling was the first beside them, his face ashen. Then Paddy. Then, both men froze, looking down where Henry held Josephine, red blood over her night dress, the bedding. A tiny, translucent leg, no larger than a man's thumb, was visible, pressed into the world by a tide of blood that wouldn't stop. "She's losing it," Henry whispered, his hands shaking as he applied pressure. "And it's taking her with it." "No time for Clarkson," Paddy bellowed, his voice a raw, jagged thing as Bill moved toward the door. "Look at the color of her, Bill. She'll be a corpse before he's even hitched his horse. Get my kit bag." Now the room transformed into a battlefield station. Bill dropped to the head of the bed, his large, calloused hands, the hands of a man who spent his peacetime gripping the rough stone of Highland crags, pressing down on Josephine's shoulders to anchor her. To get to the site of the hemorrhage, Paddy barked at Bill to strip back the silk. As the nightgown was pulled away, Josephine's physical history was laid bare under the harsh, flickering lamps. Bill's breath hitched. He saw the jagged, silver-white tracks across her ribs and the faint, circular burns near her collarbone. They weren't the clean scars of a surgeon, they were the signatures of his brother David's interrogation exercises. His own brother had treated her like a piece of training equipment. Then, the gown fell further. For an imperceptibly quick moment, Bill saw her breasts. They were full, tight with the hormonal surge of the pregnancy she hadn't known she carried. The nipples dark, large, sensitive against the deathly pallor of her skin. A jolt of complicated, forbidden heat shot through Bill, clashing violently with the horror of the moment. To see her like this, exposed, broken, yet biologically vital, was a transgression. It was the very fact that she was forbidden, a lethal operative and his brother's project, that made the sight of her so intoxicatingly exciting. Even as his stomach churned with the metallic scent of her blood, he tightened his grip on her shoulders, his jaw locking so hard a muscle pulsed in his temple. "Don't just stand there, Bill," Paddy roared, splashing poison over his hands until the room smelled like a distillery. "Look at the claret." "Henry, hold those legs." The Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife caught the light. Paddy made a cut, hip bone to hip bone, across her lower stomach with a hand that didn't tremble. The skin parted, and Paddy immediately worked past the rectus muscles, his fingers digging deep. "She's fighting me," Paddy hissed, his face inches from Josephine's. "Henry, the pressure." Now Henry Druce, working from the foot of the bed, felt the tiny, trapped limb. "I have it. It's moving. It's coming back in." "Move it," Paddy commanded. His hand, slick with blood and high-proof spirits, vanished into the uterine opening. He was unhooking the child, his fingers dancing a macabre ballet inside his own sister's body. With a sharp, wet sound, the tiny fetus was eased out through the abdominal cut. Bill turned his head, unable to watch the removal of the sticky placenta, the moment where the room seemed to fill with the steam of a fresh kill. "The sheet, Henry," Paddy whispered, his voice suddenly small. Henry took the tiny, linen-wrapped bundle, setting it aside with a tenderness that broke the silence. "Now we close," Paddy said, his voice regaining its sandpaper edge. "Bill, the parachute silk, bathe it in the alcohol. If we don't get these layers right, she'll never stand straight again." For the next 2 hours, Bill watched Paddy, the man the world saw as a drunken brawler, so with the delicacy of a lace maker. He watched the silver-purple line form across her skin. "The penicillin," Paddy grunted, his eyes bloodshot. "Every 4 hours. And the liver extract." "I'll get the iron tablets," Bill said, his voice weak, his mouth dry. He looked at Josephine, now covered in fresh blankets, her breathing a fragile, whistling thing. He thought of the scars David had left, the nipple he shouldn't have seen, and the terrifying, magnetic pull of the woman who had just survived the impossible. Paddy stood up, wiping his hands on a filthy towel. "She's so, Bill. She'll be awake in 6 hours asking for a gun." "You tell her ... You tell her she stays in this bed for 3 weeks, or I'll put her in a cage." The silence that followed Paddy's departure was heavy, smelling of iron and high-proof spirits. Josephine's breathing was slow, a rhythmic fluttering that seemed too fragile to sustain the warrior Bill knew her to be. "She's too white, Bill," Henry whispered, his voice cracking as he adjusted the blankets. "The blankets aren't enough. She's losing the heat because she's lost the fuel. Her heart is pumping next to nothing." Bill looked at her translucent skin, the blue veins tracing paths like frozen rivers. He knew the look. He had seen it on the crags after a fall, and he had seen it in the eyes of men in the desert sand. She was draining away. "The transfusion kit," Bill said, his voice regaining the authority of a commanding officer. "Paddy has one in the stores. Get it. And Henry, find out her type." Now 88,888,888 minutes later, the room was transformed again. The shattered furniture had been pushed to the walls, leaving a clearing around the bed that felt like a sacrificial altar. Henry returned with a wooden crate marked with the serpent and staff. Inside, nestled in straw, were glass bottles, rubber tubing, and the heavy, silver-plated needles that looked more like medieval instruments than tools of mercy. "I have her file," Henry panted, holding a singed manila folder. "Typo universal. But we don't have a bank, Bill. We don't have a single chilled bottle in the house." Bill didn't hesitate. He began unbuttoning his own cuff, exposing a forearm corded with muscle and scarred by granite. "I'm O negative. I've known since Ample 4th. Scrub your hands, Henry. Use the poitin. You're the medic now." The process was primitive, a direct link between the master of the house and the dying operative. Henry worked with trembling precision, sterilizing the donating needle over a spirit lamp before plunging it into Bill's vein. The dark, rich crimson surged into the glass reservoir, warm and pulsing with the life of a man who held the Highlands in his bones. "Now her," Bill commanded, his face growing pale as his own life force left him. Henry found the vein in Josephine's thin arm. As the needle pierced her skin, she let out a low, subconscious whimper, the first sound she had made since the ordeal began. "Steady, Ethan," Bill murmured, his voice tender. He reached out with his free hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Take it. It's sterling blood. It's stubborn. It'll hold you here." For an hour, they sat in the dim light, the only sound the rhythmic drip-clack of the glass valves. As Bill's blood entered her system, the deathly grey of her lips began to shift. A faint, ghostly pink crept back into her cheeks, like the first hint of dawn over the Perthshire uplands. Bill watched her intently. He felt a strange, metaphysical tether forming. He was pouring himself into her, not in the lustful way his brother had done, rather his strength, his history, his very essence. It felt like a dark communion, a secret shared between the stone walls that even David would never understand. By the time the second bottle was emptied into her, Josephine's hand, in his felt warmer. Her pulse, once a frantic tapping, had slowed to a steady, rhythmic thrum. "She's stabilizing," Henry breathed, collapsing into a chair, his face slick with sweat. "The hemorrhage has held. The stitching is tight." Bill leaned back, feeling the lightheadedness of the blood loss. He looked at the woman on the bed, the woman his brother had broken, the woman Paddy had butchered to save, and the woman he had now literally brought back from the threshold. "She stays here," Bill said, his voice a low growl. "No one speaks of the child. No one speaks of the surgery. To the rest of the house, she has the A flu. If Dudley Clark or London asks, she is A preparing. Do you understand, Henry?" "I understand," Henry said, looking at the tiny, linen-wrapped bundle in the corner. "But she'll know, Bill. A woman like her. She'll feel the silence where a life used to be." Bill looked out the window. The first light of a cold, grey 1944 was breaking over the horizon. The Ghost Army was waiting in the south, and the Fortress of Colditz waited in the east. "Then we give her something else to fill the silence," Bill said grimly. "We give her the mission." He looked at the bundle. "A nephew, maybe, or a niece." "A boy," Henry replied, as if reading Bill Sterling's mind. "Then I will bury him in the family chapel. He will not be forgotten."